So imagine if this primitive allowed order flow to be substantially moved between protocols because now users are incentivized to use one protocol over another and governance enables that. And so that's where the governance token and governance in the system like this comes into play is that for the very first time, users could actually be motivated enough to change their behavior or change which DEX they use. It's, arbitrary to them, but for that DEX or protocol, that could mean they're able to track all the order flow in the space. So with being able to compete, right? I guess liquidity is no longer a frontier that you can compete on in that sense that there's mint bots, there's arbitrage bots. And the fact is that, the market generally is revolving towards like one or two winners, right? So
Right.
all the other, I guess, challenger AMMs or exchanges, they're finding it, I wouldn't say hard, but I guess it's like, why would you use them with the extra implied risk than use Uniswap or use SushiSwap, using the leading ones, right? So this actually creates an incentive for them to, hey, participate in our governance and potentially change how user order flow behaves, right? I guess it's the same idea in Curve, like just small tweaks in APY could mean like X 100 million more in liquidity. Even small tweaks in how the probabilities work could mean like getting a 5% more market share, 10% more market share in the space that they're operating in.
Welcome to Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel, where we explore projects in decentralized finance that are innovating and driving our mission of financial freedom forward. Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review Mission DeFi and spread the word by posting a tweet to the show. All opinions expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests are their opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Black Knox, Material Indicators, or any other affiliated organizations. You should not treat any opinion expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests as an inducement to make a particular investment, follow a particular strategy, or become involved with any project. A project being featured on the show is not an endorsement of that project in any way. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Now, here's Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel.
All right. I am excited today to have Shahmeer from Fluidity joining us. And I am completely fascinated with the way they describe their project and what they're doing. It seems to be adding incentives for sending and receiving funds and really utilizing crypto. And everyone knows that listens to this show. I am very focused on working to bridge in new users to the space and engage people that are in the space in new ways. So I'm really excited to have you on, Shahmeer. I appreciate you joining us. If you could quickly tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, whatever you're comfortable with, how you got into crypto, and then we'll dive into how Fluidity started and why.
Yeah, awesome. Hey everyone, I am Shahmeer. My background actually is in game design, and right now I'm working in crypto. We're with a team of 10 people. We're based out of Australia, but we do have a globally distributed team, and I think it's really worth emphasizing that a lot of inspiration and some of the thinking behind Fluidity came from just being, I guess, inspired by how games are developed and some of the mechanics and theory that games use to make themselves fun and addictive. We applied that into, I guess, creating a new primitive and the goal is to basically replicate some of the things that games can do in terms of psychological effects and feedback loops and apply that to a DeFi product.
That sounds awesome. How did you were you in gaming and working in gaming and had some interest in crypto and DeFi and just started dabbling a little bit, or how did you make this transition? What was that like for you?
Well, it's a funny story. So for context, I am, really relatively young. I mean, well, not for the space, but I am, in my early 20s. And
Sure.
so when I did get into game design, I was relatively young, I guess. I was 12 years old. when I first got into it. And I actually was able to get successful pretty quickly this was the early days of Android, but also Windows Phone existed back then. And my games on Android were getting hundreds of thousands of downloads to the point that Microsoft, they're running a program and they said like, hey, you should port your games over and we'll give you a free Windows Phone, a Surface tablet, $1,000 in ad credit. And I'm like, yeah, sure. So it took me like less than a day to do it, but it was so fascinating because,
Nice.
that game on Windows Phone was able to get like 100,000 downloads, which is a pretty impressive feat because back then there was only 10 million Windows phones out there in the wild. So it was like 1%
I was going to
penetration
say,
in
were there even
all
that?
Windows phones. Yeah.
Was that was their peak, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And so it was a niche product as well, relatively. So my niche that I was really good at was horror games. And there was something about those games that were making them go viral consistently. And I think what's so fascinating was that back then I didn't really realize what was happening, why these games were getting like so much downloads cumulatively. But eventually over the course of the as years progressed, I actually did realize what was happening, and it kind of opened this entire world in front of me. So that's kind of how I really early on I got into crypto because I was 12, 13. And so I was starting to earn some money
Wow.
on this, but being under 18, you really can't do much about like owning your finances. So it was like piggybacking off of my parents' bank accounts and all that. So having some, autonomy over my money, I actually started, learning about Bitcoin because it just fixed all my problems because, Bitcoin was something that, hey, you don't need to KYC yourself. You don't need your parents' approval to buy something. And it was something of my own. And I think that was that idea of like having something of my own really attracted me to the fact of, like, hey, I want to start participating in Bitcoin. Never really got into it too seriously back in 2013, but I was aware of it and some of the benefits and implications it could have or decentralized technology could have. And then in late 2016, very early 2017, I really got into Bitcoin. And since then, it's been all cryptocurrencies for me for the last 5 years.
That's an awesome story, and it's even more awesome that you've actually been developing and building in this in making money from development, starting in gaming. You've been doing that for 8 or 9 years now, at least, based on kind of generally your age. So that's fascinating. So while you may be young, you actually have a ton of experience of kind of navigating, building, and producing, and launching, and supporting, and having community around the things that you're doing.
Yeah, and that kind of like, inspired me to actually build in the crypto space because, you get very up close and personal to the community. And yeah, there is something very special about games that, it's the fact that when you watch someone play a game and they find something cool that you did or like an attention to detail from your side and they notice it just gives you this amazing dopamine hit that I
Yeah.
don't think anything else can replicate. And I think, being a builder, even in the crypto space, you get some of that same stuff. Like, when you hear people talk about your project and they say, wow, that's so fascinating, it's quite the experience. And I think, just that kind of motivated me. And that's kind of how actually we were able to build our team. So I was at university here in Australia and, you know, Adelaide is actually a pretty small town relatively. And well, it's not a small town, it's a city, but it's relatively small. And so a lot of people actually, they're really, I guess, focusing inwards in terms of like when they look for opportunities and stuff. So there's some really, really great programmers that, were in my cohort. And it was actually, we were able to identify them and kind of go to them. And this was bear market, right? So that was 2017, 18 when I actually was able to kind of go to people and say, hey, what if we build in crypto? Because these people were, they didn't like the idea of working for a big company, even
Right.
though they could. And
Yep.
so, and crypto was a meme, 2017, 18, so it was kind of like laughed at, but they gave it a shot, and we were able to make things move very, very quickly, I guess. And there's a bit of luck, definitely, people trusting us early on, and there's no other space that lets you do that.
Yeah.
I think one comment that your audience might find interesting was that back in, 2013 or 14, when I was making games, nobody cared about game developers or funding them or even participating in games. Like just to get a $10,000 like grant as a game developer was like, that was unheard of in the sense like sure people would get it, but there's no money in games, So it's so fascinating
Yeah.
how the dynamic has changed. Like you hear like the most weird game, or generic game raising millions of dollars now. And back then, like the most fascinating or interesting game in the world wouldn't be able to do so. And
That's
you hear
amazing.
stories about how game developers actually had to sell their houses and their livelihoods just because they wanted to bet big on their game. And there's many such cases. Now it's so different. So I guess, that that's just an interesting comment or dynamic
Totally.
in games.
Yeah, what a flip. What a total
Yeah.
flip. I mean, I remember watching a few years ago a documentary about indie game makers. I can't think of the name of it, but kind of the struggle they were going through to actually survive and build. And you're right. It's the flip is absolutely incredible. Do you I mean, are you looking now at the game industry and saying, "Okay, well, I'm gamifying my protocol over here, but you know, you had so much success in building games. Do you sometimes wish you were back at it, or do you really feel like this is a vehicle for you to do that as well eventually?"
I see myself eventually, like converging back into the game industry one way or another. But, I think for me, there's still some fascination in like, disrupting finance. I don't know what it is,
Yeah,
but I want to like explore the space a bit more.
cool.
Maybe I might be back at a game or who knows, but games are something that are hard. They're not easy. People make them think that they're easy because they're like, I guess, visually communicatable. So a lot of people think, oh yeah, okay, I can, do so much as a game developer because I made a 3D model or I imported a 3D model in a game engine. So I guess it's one of those things that, it's hard to kind of really grasp what's happening. A lot of times,
You know,
actually just recently, funny story, sorry to interrupt you, but
no, go ahead. I was interrupting you.
there, a lot of times people ask me about game economics and like tokenomics in games and how to, theoretically think about models. I'm like, that is so hard because there's this game that I've been playing and I think a lot of people are still playing it till today. It's called RuneScape, and RuneScape was launched, I think, early 2000, right? And even till today, it still has I would say, quote unquote, relatively healthy economy that people in Venezuela actually use it as a prospective career to farm gold in RuneScape. It's a really good
Wow.
career option, because of how healthy the economy is in RuneScape, that there's so much demand for the gold, right? And so I actually came across this 200-page long paper on the entire economy of RuneScape, right? That kind of, like looks at the different ways that gold sinks exist, how people burn money, how money comes into the economy, how to build like the entire trading, and all the theory behind it. And I'm like, that's the type of like, I guess, level you need to be thinking at if you even want to have a somewhat of a shot at building like a sustainable crypto token economy, right? And
Yeah.
and RuneScape, has hundreds of thousands of players, so it does seem to work. But even then, it took them 20 years plus to really figure it out. I mean, the economy was successful early on, so but it took a while, and it took a
Sure.
lot of like things, right, that they were able to come up with over the course of 20 years. So if a new protocol is launching and they have a token, it's tough to argue that, like they're able to replicate that same sort of like phenomena as RuneScape has because yeah, I mean anybody that's pitching a game, right? They're pitching for the idea that hey, this game will last the next 20 years, right? And that's hard when you think about like what exists and what has lasted for 20 years. I really don't know any other online game that has like, a healthy community like that's been on for that for the previous 20 years. I think it's
Yeah,
quite an
that's amazing.
impressive feat. Yeah. For RuneScape.
That kind of brings me to something you mentioned earlier that I wanted to ask you about. And I promise we'll get to fluidity here, but I'm kind of fascinated with the line of this discussion, especially
Yeah.
zero expertise in the gaming industry. And so, my work has never been in that world. But you talked about the fact that when you were first doing games, you didn't, you had great success, but you didn't necessarily understand why the mechanics were working, right? Why people were getting the dopamine rush when they were getting it. Is that something that you just kind of figured out over time? Oh, this is why this is working. Is it something you had to like study and understand from other people that were studying gamification and how it worked? I mean, and was that something that you could then say, okay, I can apply this as I build new things and build new games, and or, when you got into crypto and you start building in, some level of gamification into what you're doing?
I think it is twofold. When I was making those games, very simple games, right? There was 4 games that had jump scares in them. So
Nice.
definitely like nothing as complicated. I guess it really came down to the fact that I was able to, it was a little bit of blind luck where I was able to like just time those jump scares appropriately. That when people were recording that, it built up and the amount of, I guess, anticipation from the audience or the player, and then it released, that the jump scare. So there was a bit of blind luck there, I think, and then just the fact that I was making games on popular subjects. I guess back then there's this, or even now there's this website called Creepypasta, and a lot of the urban
Sure.
legends and myths actually originate from that website. So basically, I was able to kind of like come up with the popular names and think, okay, I'll make a game on this, and then it was pretty easy because people make up these stories, but it's actually crazy how viral every story was going, like especially the popular ones. So I think you might have heard of Slenderman. That that was quite
Sure.
the like horror game for a couple of months back, a couple of years ago. And I think, and that actually originated also from creepypasta, as far as I know. And nowadays, I don't know. There's this new one that's come up. It's called the Backrooms, and that actually also originated from that website. So a lot of the popular, I guess, urban legends and myths actually originate from their website. And I guess I was able to just time those things right, just with the right amount of, I guess, jump scares and playable content that made those things go viral. So
That's awesome.
actually, when I did realize this was actually, I was listening to a podcast very similar to the one like this. It was actually with the creator of an email client called Superhuman. So
Sure.
is a very fascinating email client because it's an email client that they're able to charge, I think, $30 a month, and they have thousands of like really, really happy users, right? And so
Right.
what what the creator was saying, he was actually an ex game designer for, believe it or not, RuneScape, right? And
Huh.
he said that, well, in the game design trade, right, they know these rules and principles that they use to make games interesting. So levels are designed in a very, very specific way in games to make them just thrilling enough. And turns out that that same wave, that most books use, like, I don't know, back in high school, every English teacher would tell you that every book has, like an introduction, and then has like, the plot, and then the climax, and all that stuff. Games actually are replicating that exact same curve. And so this can be modeled as a curve of like attention from the user, and levels actually follow that. And songs also follow that. And it actually gave examples of that. And I thought that was so fascinating because every experience, no matter game or email or, even like financial, can actually replicate some of those ideas. And he said basically like, hey, there's all these like, I guess, first principles that games use, and you can apply that to practically anything and make it equally as fun. So a game is not, the fact that it's like visually appealing. Sure, that has a factor in it, but more of some of those principles. So really, you can make an email client as fun as a game because you can apply those exact same principles that make games fun. And I thought that was such a fascinating idea because you could do it for anything and everything could feel like a game, but it's not, you know? And so I kind of went with it and I said, okay, let's see what problems we can solve with game design.
That's beautiful. I love that. I absolutely love that. So let's get into Fluidity. How it sounds like you guys were doing development in the crypto space prior to Fluidity with the folks that you partnered with from university. Are there other things that you guys built and that you put out there as applications, or were they just things you guys were using, or what were you doing?
So before we got into Fluidity, we were trying to build a student client for Algorand. And
Ah,
it's kind of like, okay, maybe we could build something that allows teachers to use blockchain in the classroom, maybe for attendance or for, like citations for sources that they could, verify that, hey, this is on the blockchain or someone made a claim, things like that. Fortune didn't work out. There's a few reasons why. I guess even though the programmers were good, is they didn't have like that practical experience of building software between like multiple people. It was kind of like we were in the blind in some sense of like where do we go when it comes to building it, what features to prioritize and things like that. So that was an unfortunate, I think I would say like an interesting lesson for us because
sure.
it made us realize that okay, we also need a CTO. And then I was able to get one. It was this person that, I've been meeting at meetups and stuff, and he's such a great programmer, but he also has experience in like working in the space. So he actually worked for a company or worked for a company that still exists. And you must have heard of it recently. It was called Mycelium. So
Sure.
Mycelium runs Chainlink nodes and it's still dear. So he was working on that, and that's kind of and he's based out of Adelaide, so we met at meetups. And Mycelium now, the guys behind Tracer, and now they're making the Mycelium token. So, he's and yeah, they're really cool people. So we've actually had experience of leadership working there. So I kind of pitched it to him, and he liked it, and he's like, "All right, let me trial it." And before you knew it, he was like, "All right, I want like it's taking over the entire project." Like, awesome, because now I'm a CTO problem sorted. So, obviously young team are awesome, but having that leadership from like an experienced CTO or experienced person in tech was basically kind of how, we were able to, okay, get everybody aligned. And yeah, now we're on track to maybe
That's
like starting next month. Yeah.
that's a great lesson, right? I mean, you guys were smart enough and modest or humble enough to realize that you knew what you didn't know, and you brought somebody in that could actually provide that framework, that guidance, the leadership to help you get things to where you wanted to go. I think that's fantastic. All right, so tell us about Fluidity and how the idea came about, and what it does, and why you guys think it's important, why you went through all the trouble to build it and launch it.
Awesome. So hopefully by now, the audience realizes that there's something to do with games there. So
You would hope, yes.
yeah, where fluidity comes in is the idea that, okay, DeFi is awesome, but, as we saw in this previous cycle, DeFi did not bring the billion users that people thought it would into crypto. Turns out it was NFTs and games and all that fun stuff, right? That has a better chance of bringing that $1 billion user base, right? And I'm sure it's getting very close because of NFTs and games. So,
Total sense.
I got to thinking, okay, well, how can we basically make DeFi fun again, essentially? And interesting enough for the average person to say, okay, I want to participate in DeFi. So, if you think about first principles, one thing that I notice here in Australia is people play the lotto. So they buy lottery tickets. It's not an Australian phenomenon, but, it's something very, I guess, part of for a lot of people, it's part of their like identity or culture to play. It's like, and that is so fascinating. So I was actually, for some reason, I purchased a book on gambling and lottery design and more about like casinos and slot machines, just some of the theory behind it. And I think the book mentioned something about the fact that, hey, people don't play lottery the lottery to win the prize. They actually play for the hope it provides. So actually, the
Wow.
lottery is providing a service, which is hope. And I thought that's so fascinating because I wonder if you could synthetically provide that same service as part of without being parasitic, right? And that's kind of what fluidity in a sense does, right? So it's gamifies how you think about paying for something because people, pay for things all the time. But at the very same time, it offers you a chance of winning something at no extra cost. And that's really where the innovation lies. It's like you're able to kind of leverage off of crypto's composability and build a new primitive that pays you yield when you use it. So there's a few reasons for why you would want to build something like this. It really, I think the biggest reason in our minds is incentives, right? So what we're thinking is right now in crypto, the real only incentive is to participate in crypto is speculation. The incentive that, holding on to crypto will earn you more money than yesterday. And you could do it by speculating that the price will increase or that, if you're staking tokens and you're getting more tokens as a consequence of staking, right? So both, I guess, these ideas really rely on the fact that you need to hold on to money to make money. So I feel like that's a very counterintuitive, line of thinking because what that prevents is, the utility of crypto assets. Because now people don't want to spend crypto because if they spend crypto, then tomorrow they'll earn less, right? If the incentive lies in holding on to it. So this, in our opinion, has kind of like stunted the growth of crypto adoption in terms of payments because there's no incentive to pay with crypto per se, right?
Right.
And for the counterparty, there's no incentive to actually accept crypto, over like fiat. Sure, you get less fees and stuff, but if nobody wants to spend it, then I don't want to make an effort to accept it when nobody's can spend it. So it seems like, kind of those things. So essentially what we created also is an incentive mechanism to incentivize that utility for the very first time. So now we're thinking we're not incentivized to hold on to it, this primitive. We're actually incentivized to spend it. The way you make money with this primitive is by spending it or by using it. And then I guess theoretically, the more you use it, the more you're expecting out of it. And that's kind of like the first principles and ideas that we've applied here is that what we built is that, hey, your USDC we're starting off with stable coins, but any crypto theoretically could be a fluid asset. Is that the USDC or that, you could turn it into a primitive that makes it work the exact same, but adds a magical property that now when you do spend it, you're earning yield as a consequence of spending it. The yield is distributed in the exact same way as you think in the gamified fashion of a lottery. So sometimes you'll win a couple of cents, other times you'll win a few dollars, and then once in a while you'll win $100 or $1,000, and then once in a really long time, someone will win a million or hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? But the cool thing is that every single time you use a fluid asset, you could win a prize, right? So every single transaction could make you win $1 million. And that's a really cool idea that we've been able to, come up with. Or is that, hey, go about your spending like you normally would. But if you use a fluid asset, you could win $1 million on every, transaction. And there's no extra cost, right? So there's no entry or opportunity cost. And yeah, and this is sustainable as well. So quite a big, revelation here for a lot of people.
That sounds amazing. So I have a lot of questions. So first, I want to kind of understand the mechanics of this.
Sure.
I can come in with a stable coin. I'm actually looking at the site right now, and when I first loaded it up, you guys are on testnet currently on Ethereum and Solana DevNet. Is that correct?
Yeah.
All right. When it says turn your stable coins into fluid, right? And so I can choose DAI, USDC, or USDT. And when I do that, it's essentially, is it wrapping them into a fluid version of those coins that I can then send to other people?
So what happens is that when you give us that USDC DAI or USDT, what we do with it is that we mint a fluid variant of it and give it to you. What we're doing in the background actually with that principle is we deposit it into a money market, such as Compound or Aave. And that yield essentially is where that prize money is coming from. So very
Nice.
similar to Pool Together, but in our models, it actually, in a sense, works better because there's no opportunity cost as a user for you. In Pool Together, it's such a fascinating product, but I think one of the issues was that you could put money in Pool Together and have a chance of winning something, but the opportunity cost is so high because that same money could be used to farm Ponzi Inu for 8,000% APY. And like that opportunity cost of not doing that was so high that I feel like that's one of the reasons why like Pool Together never was able to really capture that liquidity. Whereas in this case, as soon as you get that fluid asset, your incentive is to go ahead and spend it. You're not like
Yeah.
losing out on yield that you would if you were to deposit an Aave, because if your intention is to hold on to it, you're not going to hold on to a fluid asset. But if your intention is to spend for something, you're going to get it, you're going to spend it, and then the next person's going to get it and spend it. And that's the idea, right? That it's a very high velocity asset, very similar to like a hot potato. And your goal in life is to spend it and then you get it because that's where the incentive lies.
That's fascinating. And I definitely love the model, and I can definitely see how it's a more superior model, or a superior model to Pull Together, because look, Pull Together is fascinating, and you're right. People like the idea of a chance to win, but the thing I'm most excited about with this is that, well, not the most exciting, but the thing I think is exciting for the ecosystem is encouraging the spending, having a project that's not dependent on uh, the stability of yield farming or whatever to keep people interested in using it, and the kind of intentionally viral potential of it, of having people say, I'll send you this money, it's going to be in Fluid, and then you just go to this website and swap it back, because that gains for you immediate user growth from people saying, oh, holy crap, I can make money. I have a potential to make money from spending the money I'm going to spend anyway, right?
Mhm.
Which then I think opens all kinds of doors to you, because there's the idea that you could, I think, be a strong gateway once you build up enough growth and usage to e-commerce integrations, to viral marketing, people referring their friends because they want to be able to use it and spend it and send it. I love all the motivations built into it, and of course the dopamine hit that we'll all get by thinking, oh, I might win something, let me see if I won something. What is the
Yeah.
how so if I received, does USDC become like FUSDC, or what am I receiving in my wallet when somebody sends it to me?
Yeah, so you receive FPUSDC, so the same kind that people have wrapped and then spent. So it'll be in kind, and actually addressing that third point that you made, like that people want their friends to use it or receive it. What we realized was, now, okay, there's an incentive for the sending party, but what about counterparty incentives, right? So a lot of times people really don't think about what's the incentive for a merchant to adopt this or use this. They have like a plethora of options, right? For payment solutions and stuff. And sure, if the senders are interested enough, they will adopt it. But we were thinking, okay, what if we actually, started or created an incentive for the counterparty? And that's exactly what happened. So 20% of the prize that's won actually goes to the receiving party. So let's say I send you 20 bucks, 20 Fluid USDC for lunch, and I win 1,000 Fluid USDC. You actually get 20% of that. So you get 200 Fluid USDC just for accepting it, right?
Nice.
So imagine if you're a merchant and you're getting tens or hundreds of daily inbound transactions. If those are fluid assets, you could be earning 20% of these prizes that are being paid out to you, and you don't have to do anything extra. So not only do we not charge merchant fees, we're actually rewarding them for accepting it. And hopefully the idea is to create those feedback loops, right? That now the counterparties are incentivized to push forward to the adoption of it. So they're going to, push forward the senders and vice versa. And it will hopefully create those initial feedback loops that create like communities and grow the pinwheel, the flywheel, sorry.
Yeah, I think that certainly is a great way to incentivize it. Is there some kind of gain, even if it's pennies, on every send and receive, or sometimes there's not?
Okay, so to answer your question, let's talk a little bit about some of the economics behind how this works, or more of like
Awesome.
the
That's where
algorithm.
I was headed. Great.
So if you think about it, if a primitive rewards you yield for using it, let's think attack frontiers, right? There could be two bots that come into the system and just start spamming transactions back and forth between themselves, right?
Yep.
And that not only is that likely, that is a guarantee that that will happen.
Sure.
And so if you think about how do you prevent against this, this seems like a very existential problem, not just for Fluidity, but for crypto protocols. Sybil attacks are everywhere. So the way we thought about solving this problem, and what we refer to as the optimistic quote unquote solution, is that we made an assumption. And that assumption is, okay, if the gas fee for these bots was always guaranteed to be more than the yield they're able to extract from the system, right? So an example would be if they did 1,000 transactions and paid $3,000 in gas fees or $5,000 in gas fees, if the expected yield was always less than the amount they paid in gas fees, statistically they will go bankrupt, right? Because if I'm earning $3,000 on average for 1,000 transactions and I paid $5,000 in gas fees, then I will go bankrupt over time, right? By attacking
Sure.
the system. So and initially it does seem a bit counterintuitive. Wait a second, I'm paying more in gas fees than I'm earning in yield. Then doesn't that mean like using Fluidity is, expected value negative? That may be an initial like, thing, or I guess thought that many people would have. But I guess what we really want you to think is that if you were gonna pay $3 in gas fees or $10 in gas fees to do something, right? You're hoping to get $10 worth of value at least out of it, or else you wouldn't do that transaction anyways, right? And so anything you get on top of it, let's say even $2 on average, right? That's something that's, expected value positive, right?
Right.
So the idea is that we're in the most pessimistic scenario, what we're promoting is that people are like we're going to do or take actions, right? Anyway, they have an incentive to use a fluid asset. Whereas if you were an attacker and your only intention is to just spam this network for prize money, you will always statistically go bankrupt. And so what we were able to then create was basically an algorithm. And this is on our website under our economics white paper. So people can actually read the math involved in it. But the TLDR is what we were able to use that create an algorithm called the TRF, the transfer reward function. And that looks at the current gas fees and the protocol's TVL and the daily active users of fluid assets, or like the annual active users, and actually then come up with basically like an indication of what a specific transaction and the probabilities it has to win. So every time you do a transaction using fluid assets, right? uh, I guess a table comes or is outputted from the TRF, and it looks at the gas fee you paid, the protocols you're interacting with, the current state of the network for that in context of that transaction. And it comes up with probabilities, right? It says, okay, let's say you paid a $3 gas fee, right? In some conditions, they might say, all right, you have a 48% chance of winning 12 cents, a 5% chance of winning, 8 cents, or 30 cents, sorry, a 1% chance of winning $1, right? And so it actually comes up with that for every single transaction. And so an example is in our economics white paper. So if anybody wants to go and look at what this would look like. But what it would also then show is like, hey, you can win up to $1 million and you have a 0.001% probability or something, right? So on average, about 60 to 70% of the cumulative transactions will win something. So there's usually about 6 tiers of prizes in the way that we've initially set the protocol. So that can be changed. It could be 20 tiers of prizes or 100 or even 2 tiers of prizes. We've started off with 6. And actually the rationale for having smaller and frequent payout actually comes from that that book I read about lotteries and casinos. And it actually goes to the theory behind slot machines. So initially when slot machines started out, they actually paid out large but infrequent prizes. And they realized that after a while, people just got tired of it. And they said, hey, this is rigged. It will never work. And you'll probably hear in pop culture references that you never win on those slot machines, right? Things like that.
Right.
So they eventually realized it and they said, okay, what if we actually instead changed it to maybe a smaller jackpot, but small and frequent payouts, right? And that's exactly what they did. And it worked out so well that every other time you play at the slot machine, you get a payout. And you realize that, hey, this seems to be working. I'm winning something. But as you progress, you realize, wait a second, you've paid more to the slot machine than you've gotten out of it, right? To the
Right.
point that you converge towards losing all your money, right?
Right.
And that's kind of like where we got this kind of thing that, hey, people might come for those large prizes, but they'll keep using fluid assets for those frequent payouts. So in Fluidity's case, you get 60 to 70% of the time you'll get something, right? And the way it's so fascinating that we've designed it, unlike pulled together, it's not like you get a ticket and you win at the end of the week or whenever, or the price period's over. You actually win in real time, right? So as soon as you do the transaction, we see if you won within the next block or two. And yeah, you see that balance or that price that you won reflected in your account or in your wallet, right? Essentially gets like an airdrop in a fluid asset that gets to your wallet. So it's very seamless from a user point of view. And same with the counterparty, right? That the sender won $1,000. Well, as part of your receiving transaction, not only do you get the principal, but you get like the extra on top of it. So we have some really, really cool like dynamics, but the experience from a user point of view is very frictionless. They use a fluid asset, they don't have to think about it, and it just works, and that's kind of what we've built. So I hope that explains the
Yeah.
economics, the math.
No,
And anybody that's still a bit doubtful, you can actually model it yourself. We've put the entire algorithm, the mathematical expression on our economics white paper, so you can actually see for yourself it working in those circumstances. Yeah.
cool. I'll put a link to it as well in the show notes. That's fascinating. So, I mean, theoretically, you're likely to get, when you send money, some level of rebate towards what you had to pay to do that transaction in gas, with the potential to win a tremendous amount of money or more than what you were sending or spending. And so you get the best of kind of both worlds there, in that you're shaving something potentially off of what you had to pay to do that transaction. And at the same
Mhm.
time, you get that hope
Mhm.
of potentially winning a lot of money. And that's fascinating to me. Now, is this something that when you win, it just pops into your wallet that block or two later when the algorithm determines it, or do
So
you have
it
to claim
depends
it?
on the chain. On Ethereum, the smaller payouts, like those couple of cents, they will be batched every 12 hours. But you can come onto our platform or whatever period, but you can come onto our website and claim it if you want to before that, as soon as you want within that next block.
Right.
But those larger prizes will basically just, be airdrop. We'll eat the gas fees as a protocol to pay those out. But on Solana and low gas fee chain, it will pay out those prices in real time, because
Nice.
it's trivial for us to pay those off.
Sure.
One extra thing that people might be thinking, okay, you guys are on Solana, how does the gas fee rule work on that? And that's a really good question, because what happens is that this rule works in exactly one on Solana. But if when we modeled it, because Solana gas fee chains are gas is so cheap, right? That the large $1 million prize, the statistical likelihood to win is 1 in every 40,000 years, right? So that didn't seem to work because, 1 in 40,000 years to win $1 million is the only
Yeah.
way. We actually took another assumption, or made another assumption, and this is also applied from Ethereum, but it makes the winning chances very same or similar. Sorry. So the other assumption that we took was that, okay, there are protocols that exist on Solana Ethereum that people pay fees to use, right? An example being Curve or Uniswap or SushiSwap, where you pay the LP 10 basis points or 20 basis points in LP fees to use it. So theoretically, if you pay or if you use 1,000 Fluid USDC to swap into Ethereum or Sol on Solana, and you pay 20 basis points in fees, that fee essentially goes to the LPs. And if every time you make that swap, you're losing out on that fee. So there's only so many of those trades you can make, right? Back and forth before you lose all your money. And that's kind of how we actually look at it on Solana side of things, or on low gas fee chain side of things, is that we also consider on like the protocols that we have integrated that extra fee that you've paid those LPs, right? So this makes it interesting because the people that are making larger trades using fluid assets, they actually have higher probabilities of winning larger prizes. There is a relationship there. It's not linear. So that doesn't mean if you pay $40 million on gas fees, you have a guarantee of winning a prize. But there is definitely a relationship there. So it actually on protocols like Uniswap, etc. If you're using more fluid assets for larger trades, you actually have a higher chance of winning a larger prize. And so this works really well because now on Solana, on those exotic use cases like, swapping between assets, well, not really exotic, but those, I guess, high value use cases of swapping between assets or even buying NFTs, those higher fees actually help us create a system that, makes it more fair for people on low gas fee chains to win a prize. And that's kind of what we're doing there. Yeah.
Nice. Eh, I'm fascinated because my thoughts start trending towards, okay, number one, I see the kind of viral capabilities of this. You can obviously see the use in commerce as more projects or companies start accepting crypto in some way, and you being able to kind of work that from a biz dev perspective. But I start to see protocols saying, well, this is a no brainer to add fluid into this. And so I wonder, and this is bigger picture, but I wonder if you guys, when you were thinking about this becoming like a really major component of the DeFi space overall, because I can really see that if you can break through at an adoption level that drives a lot of people wrapping their tokens into fluid tokens and utilizing them, that the protocols in the world are just naturally going to say, okay, how can we integrate this? How can we make this work? Because so many people are adopting this. Have you guys kind of thought through the fact that, this could really blow up and then I haven't thought through this far enough, but what happens first of all, do you guys is there a token for the Fluidity project at all? Or are you just doing the wrapping of the existing things that come in?
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting, right? If you thought like the previous part was interesting, it gets even crazier. So governance is, fascinating, and governance is awesome. And we eventually realized that, wait a second, we could enable a new form of, I guess, PvP. I mean, I don't like using that word, but a new form of, I guess, a user order flow attention. So I'll explain what that means. If you think about it, if there's probabilities on every action you take, right, that the TRF outputs, right? Like, okay, swap on Uniswap, 40% chance of winning 10 cents, right?
Right.
Theoretically, what you could do is you could change how these probabilities behave or what they are based on different actions that users take, even if they're the exact same thing, right? Let's say you
Right.
have the ability to swap on SushiSwap or Uniswap, right? And what if governance decides, right, hypothetically, that, hey, if you trade on SushiSwap for the exact same order, right, 1,000 USD, fluid USDC to ETH, right? But if you trade on SushiSwap or Dodo or another like AMM over Uniswap, we'll triple your chances of winning that jackpot $1 million, right? If I'm a rational user, I'm thinking, wait a second, I get the exact same out of it. I get $1,000 worth of Ethereum, but I have a triple chance of winning $1 million, right? So why wouldn't I trade on a third party or like the non like king or the non leading exchange, right?
Yeah,
And
like
this
the
is where,
Fluidity decks.
right? Well, that could even exist, right?
You're right.
So, but think about the binary example between Uniswap and SushiSwap, right? Why wouldn't I trade on SushiSwap, right? With everything else being the same. And
Sure.
that's interesting because for the very first time, we've created a primitive that basically can incentivize user order flow, right?
Right.
That same user that was going to make the trade regardless, they don't care which DEX it routes, their order gets routed to, right? At the end of the day, they're thinking about their expected value out of that trade, right? And we said your expected value is better if you just use SushiSwap instead, right? And now all of a sudden, SushiSwap has a competitive advantage for those that user order flow, right?
Sure.
And if that's significant enough, all of a sudden, the leading exchange like Uniswap is losing user order flow because users are saying, why would I use Uniswap? Or if I use SushiSwap instead, I have the ability of winning much more money, right? On average, right? And that's a very fascinating idea we realize that governance enables in a system like this. Because if you look at what we're seeing in the crypto space, Curve does something very similar, right? With their emissions, right? Vote for Frax or vote for, the three curve pool and get higher, token emissions when you provide liquidity, right? That's
Right.
great because it gets that organic demand for those stable coins, right? But it doesn't affect liquidity on Uniswap. It doesn't affect order demand on Uniswap because in Get the Curve wars is such a big narrative, and $400 million plus of bribes have been paid to Convex token holders, right? And so we're thinking, okay, wait, even more valuable than liquidity in this space, right, is user order flow, right? Because order flow is the source of revenue. It's the source of, liquidity as a second order effect, right? And it enables a lot more power, I guess, for a protocol than this liquidity does, right? And so imagine if this primitive allowed order flow to be substantially moved between protocols because now users are incentivized to use one protocol over another, and governance enables that. And so that's where the governance token and governance in the system like this comes into play, is that for the very first time, users could actually be motivated enough to change their behavior or change which DEX they use. It's, arbitrary to them, but for that DEX or protocol, that could mean they're able to track all the order flow in the space. So with being able to compete, right? I guess liquidity is no longer a frontier that you can compete on, in that sense that there's mint bots, there's arbitrage bots. And the fact is that, the market generally is revolving towards like one or two winners, right? So
Right.
all the other, I guess, challenger AMMs or exchanges, they're finding it, I wouldn't say hard, but I guess it's like, why would you use them with the extra implied risk? Then use Uniswap or use SushiSwap, using the leading ones, right? So this actually creates an incentive for them to, hey, participate in our governance and potentially change how user order flow behaves, right? I guess it's the same idea in Curve, like just small tweaks in APY could mean like X 100 million more in liquidity. Even small tweaks in how the probabilities work could mean like getting a 5% more market share, 10% more market share in the space that they're operating in. So that's a very interesting, I guess, feature that we've unlocked through a primitive like this, right? So
Yeah.
users don't even know about it because they don't care about all this thing in the background. They don't have to, right? Because the idea from a user facing point of view, this is a very simple primitive. You can explain it to a caveman. Use DEX, use Sushi Swap, get more prizes. That's it, right? But
Yeah.
in the background, it's like all this fight for revenue and user flow and market share. So that's a really cool thing that this enables for the very first time.
Yeah, that's amazing. I hadn't thought about that, and that makes a ton of sense. And then I could also see, incentivizing by those protocols that want people to use Fluid so they can gain more share
Mm.
to do matching on prizes with their governance
So
token.
you're one step ahead of me. Exactly. So we later realized that, wait a second, because we built a sustainable token distribution model that works, right, and prevents bots, we can go to protocols and say, hey, do you want to be more competitive for user order flow? How about you subsidize some of that
Yeah.
order flow costs, right?
And they're
And
doing that now. I mean, they're doing that every
exactly,
day.
they're doing that, but they're not getting those benefits, right? Because right now,
Exactly.
the way liquidity mining has been designed is disjoint from the community benefiting, right? If I'm a user of an AMM or even a DEX or an NFT marketplace that is doing some sort of liquidity mining, right? I don't get those rewards. It's a lot of times mercenary capital and people that have nothing to do with the AMM. They have no loyalty or have even used it, right? They don't even use it, have to use the platform most of the times, right? Those people are the ones getting the tokens and ownership of it, right? And they most likely don't. What if for the very first time your users were getting those tokens, right? not only do you become more competitive in getting users, but you're aligning interests because, hey, I love using SushiSwap or I love using Uniswap or Dodo. I'm getting tokens of Dodo. I have ownership over Dodo's governance because I'm a user, right? So this is a really interesting idea because for the very first time, any sort of like AMN, decentralized exchange, even NFT marketplace, and even a game could use this avenue as a way to distribute their tokens, right? And it
Yeah.
can't be spammed, can't be attacked, and yeah, and worst case scenario, they're just getting more of those genuine users, right? So yeah, that will be a very interesting dynamic because protocols can essentially bootstrap themselves through fluid assets and utility mining, as we call it.
Oh, I love that name. And is that built into the system now, this kind of incentivized
Yeah,
mechanism?
we've built it. We will launch it a
Nice.
bit later,
Nice.
and we've actually have Dodo Exchange. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's
Sure.
they've actually are interested in doing it with us. So
I think you're
likely,
going to be
for
I think you're going to be taking highest bidder at some point.
well, it's going to converge to the fact that protocols will subsidize your like 99.99% of that gas fee because we can make it 100% or else bots will attack, but
Sure.
it will converge towards that.
Yeah.
It really will start converging towards that. But here's where it gets cool, right? We actually, I don't know if you've been following along the Uniswap governance proposal, right? Uniswap doesn't want to enable fees, right? Or
Right.
well, but they want revenue, right? Because they're concerned that if we enable fees, we'll get slippage. And this is like, I guess, an existential crisis for practically every DApp out there that doesn't have fees. I guess there's a problem with enabling fees because in crypto, you're default zero in the sense of fees. Someone will force you and make lower fees, and someone will force that and make lower fees, and they'll start converging towards 0% fees, right? So
Absolutely.
protocols are then going to get stuck in that sense. Like, how do we, solve that problem? So we actually ran some numbers and we realized that if only 5% of those trading pairs that Uniswap wants to enable fees, if only 5% of that volume was through fluid asset, because 20% of the reward goes to the counterparty. In Uniswap's case, you're trading against a smart contract, but we can actually program through governance, right? Instead of giving it to the smart contract, we give it to the Uniswap treasury instead, that 20% cut, right? That goes to the receiver. If only 5% of the volume was, through fluid assets, they'd earn more in fees than they would by enabling a fee switch, right?
That's
Through fluid assets. And that's what's so fascinating is that it just takes 5% of the volume because that's like how this works, right? And imagine 20%, 30%, 50%. So I guess the idea is that there is, I guess, like the cold start problem for us because people have to use it, adopt it,
Yeah.
and someone has to start using it to create that flywheel effect. But what we're doing is building so many incentives into it so that it becomes so like I guess a no-brainer to say, okay, let's take a gamble on adopting a fluid asset. There's no extra cost for us, and all these upsides exist, right? And
Sure.
we've just been adding more and more upsides as we can find for protocols to kind of say, if you don't use fluid assets, you're going to get left behind, right? For a very long time, protocols that didn't do liquidity mining, they lost liquidity and TVL. And so I guess the kind of idea here is that if you don't participate fluid assets, you're going to lose users because those protocols are now basically incentivizing your users to trade on them or use them instead. Yeah.
Is there a world, have you allowed yourself to imagine that because there is this potential for this, right? Because, well, first,
Mhm.
let me get back to the adoption, the cold start problem. Look, I think that the beauty of this model for you and what you just talked about incentivizing for protocols, the beauty of it is that then instead of it becoming a pure end user consumer marketing problem, it's a biz dev and integration problem. And
Yeah.
and you've made that so much less of a problem with this incentivization as well as with solving an adoption problem for protocols, right? So at the end
Mhm.
of the day, there is the potential with what you're doing, and this I'm I do the big dreamer thing a lot, so bear with me, but there is a potential for a huge percentage of the DeFi world all transactioning in F-wrapped tokens, right? Where why wouldn't you, right? Now, I guess there's the risk that somebody copies you and tries to up the ante in some way or I don't know, does higher risk yield or whatever. But there is a potential for that. Is that something you guys have thought about? That like if you blow up and if you have the kind of success you think is possible with this model, that FWrapped tokens and I'm using the term wrapped become dominant.
I mean, potentially, right? Because this doesn't just apply to DeFi or DEXs or AMMs, right? This works in NFT marketplaces. This works in games. It works in social apps. It works in any form of DApp or crypto ecosystem that has any form of value transfer happening in it, which is 100% of all use cases. Some sort of value is being transferred, right?
Right.
Any value transfer can be represented in a fluid asset form, right?
Right.
And so games, are something that could adopt this, and games likely will adopt something like this to just like bootstrap and grow their economies. NFT marketplaces could adopt this. Why trade your NFT for ETH when if you could trade it for Fluidity, you could get $1 million of ETH for buying or selling an NFT, right? So it's they could adopt it. So like I guess the use cases are endless in something like this. And
Yeah.
eventually our plan is to actually create an API for developers to actually kind of define what the trigger mechanism may be in their app, right? So in some cases where it's not so trivial to say, okay, there's a transaction happening and the price is like then paid out, they could actually eventually in the future define it as well. So like, if you're like those streaming money platforms, right, where you stream money like in like
Super
every
fluid.
block, like something like Superfluid, and actually we have it in our docs as an example, could actually say, okay, instead of paying people when the deposit happens, we actually, when the entire like money has been streamed, that's when the prize money, payout triggers, right? If there's a prize, right? So things like that, even developers could define like in more a bit harder use cases as we progress it. So yeah, I guess applications are endless, and the idea is that really, it could even become the crypto middleware, right? And that's another place we see this happening, is that even people might not even realize it. They're actually interacting with fluid assets as part of their transaction. And
Yeah.
we're actually in talks with, protocols on Arbitrum like Dopex that are doing auctions, and when you deposit to the wallet, it could use fluid assets in the middleware to, do the final deposit. Even aggregators, right? Aggregators are interesting for us, right? So let's give the example of an aggregator. What is an aggregator and how does it work, right? So for most aggregators, what happens is that they're basically finding you the best route possible, right? For the highest expected outcome for your transactions. So if I have 1,000 USDC and I want ETH, right? It's gonna find all the routes possible, sometimes 2 hops, to get you the maximum amount of ETH possible, considering gas fees, right? Now, that's what they do, right? It's very simple in the sense that all they're thinking about is, okay, what gives me the maximum ETH possible? So we're actually in talks with a few aggregators, and the idea here is that, okay, what if instead of, maybe using ETH/USDC, right? You actually routed it through like USDC to Fluid USDC to ETH instead, right? Just adding the Fluid
Right.
USDC in that part. Or if you start with a Fluid USDC, maybe adding 2 Fluid USDC, Fluid asset hops, right? And so
Right.
at any given time, they can actually, we're building an API out, and they can ping us and say, okay, I'm thinking I'm going to take Fluid USDC and then switch to Fluid DAI and then give the person DAI, or give them Fluid DAI instead, even, right? And what is the probability of winning, right? Because I want to account for that, and when I build the route, right? And we can actually ping them that, and they can actually account for it. So there's a new, I guess, frontier unlocked, because then now aggregators are also like realizing that, hey, imagine if they have to pick between using fluid assets between, coming back to that example, Dodo or Uniswap, right? They might even just route it through Dodo because they ping us and then we say, hey, you routed through Dodo, the expected value is 3 times higher than Uniswap, right? And being liquidity being very similar, and they're like, okay, you know what, we're just gonna route it through Dodo. Where 99% of the time they might route it through Uniswap instead, right?
Right.
So a user who doesn't even know what Dodo is or a fluid asset is could just be using USDC, and in the middleware of all of it could also be interacting with fluid assets, right?
Nice.
And not even know it. And win prizes is part of it, and that's like kind of the experiences that long term even, right? What we're thinking is if this really does take out and hit retail, right? Like the idea is that, someone in some remote area of the world is paying for groceries and wins life-changing amount of money for doing something that they were gonna do, right?
Right.
And if this really takes off, like this is me just like, dreaming it here,
Sure.
but there could be a generation of kids growing up that just think that money just behaves in the ways that money just rewards you to use it, and it's just always been like that. But it's money is not something that you feel feisty about using or spending. You actually are incentivized, and they just that's where the incentive in money is. That like the economy, like the money that's locked up in like the top 0.1% is actually always perpetually flowing around because that's where incentives lie.
That's
Obviously,
I love that dream. That's awesome.
but yeah, DeFi I think is our best place to start for something
Sure.
like this. You have the people that understand it, that want to use something like this, that can benefit from it initially. And hopefully as we start hitting more and more product market fit and validation of this idea, we start expanding NFTs, marketplaces, games, and retail payments.
Well, and the beauty of that is that for the steps into the real world, look, I think you're going to have a whole ecosystem pop up around the API because I think people will start thinking of, you know, thousands of ways to integrate and incentivize people with it. And I think that building it here first makes the most sense because you get the volume and the developers within the space who have a
Right.
clear motivation and incentive to bridge into the real world or into web 2 or into fintech or tradfi or whatever you want to call it. So building up those usage levels, building up the flow and the track record, I think will just continue to help it grow. And people will say, wait, this, that's what I said at the beginning of the show was the potential for this to incentivize bridging people into this and kind of the vision you were just talking about, what could be potential is it gives yet another really cool incentive for the real world, the people aren't nuts like us, to start adopting easier implementations of this. I interviewed a guy today who has yesterday, I'm sorry, who has a project called brew.money.
Mm.
And it's an app, it's a wallet, a non-custodial wallet for the average person, right? And it's got the plaid connections to your bank account, and you can deposit funds directly, and immediately you're earning money on Aave in their beta, right? And they're going to add all kinds of other capabilities, but for them, this is a no-brainer fit, right? They're already trying to bridge that gap. If they can incentivize that further, and then if they can work with protocols that have integrated Fluidity so that the earning potential or the prize potential is even greater, that's pretty fantastic. This is brilliant, man. I really love this model.
I appreciate it. Well, the way I see it potentially playing out, right, especially with the retail front, is that if it's really like a hit in the crypto space, right? That, like for a very long time, or for I guess not long time, for a period of time, Axie Infinity was so popular in the Philippines because everybody was, using it or playing it, that merchants in the Philippines preferred like the Axie Infinity token instead of money.
That's a great example.
So and that was like they were even willing to take on the volatility risk involved in like it, and unfortunately for a lot of them that didn't work out right. But we're working with stables here, and I guess the thing is like if people are thinking is it enough of an incentive for people to like put in the effort of creating a crypto wallet and using crypto money, right?
Right.
I might argue that there's precedent for people to do that, right? Because of like the popularity of Axie Infinity, people were incentivized to go ahead and use it. But there's not really incentive of using Axie tokens, right, as a payment thing. It was just kind of something that people had and wanted to use, right? But I think what's so fascinating with this is that if this does take off, it might be like people all around the world just creating crypto wallets and using fluid assets for payments, right? Because they're like, hey, wait a second, I'm paying for this anyways. If I use this on Solana or on Ethereum or whatever, I could potentially win $1 million or buy a house or all that stuff and not pay anything extra. Especially in Southeast Asia, like as part of our research and like us talking to a lot of people, we see that it's like all the places, right? Like I think was there 7-Eleven in Southeast Asia? Like when you buy something as part of your receipt, right? Right at the bottom, it actually gives you lottery tickets within the 7-Eleven lottery.
Wow.
So that's how like, much gambling is part of their culture.
True.
And I think what's so fascinating is that, we're just adding I'm not saying we're adding gambling to money itself, but I guess we're replicating that same effect that people are just so enthusiastic about in money itself, right?
Right.
And I guess if those people were going to spend money, why not, get that hit and then pay nothing extra as part of it? So it could work out really, really well, if people are able to get it. And that's why we're keeping two lines of like communication here in the sense of like narratives. One is the very simple, use money, earn money, and win a lot of money. No extra cost, all that stuff. And then there's that cool DeFi stuff, like competing for user order flow, utility mining, and bribes to token holders. All that, degen stuff also exists, right? So you're able to, I guess, get the best of both worlds with something like this.
Yeah, look, and I could see a pure Fluidity wallet. I could see, I mean, look, I can see 100,000 different potential uses and integrations. And I think it makes total sense. And I think your messaging and onboarding strategy makes complete sense. In terms of, are you guys going to be deploying? I know Polygon was a backer of you. Is the plan to get on as many L1s and L2s as possible with this? Are you planning on sticking with Solana and Ethereum initially? Kind of what's the longer term deployment plan across chains?
Yeah, I mean, Solana, Ethereum definitely is like the launch chains, but we have eyes on a few other chains as well where this could work really well and that have active communities. I think Arbitrum's a really, really interesting one because Arbitrum, without token incentives yet, has a very thriving DeFi community. Like all other chains, I guess DeFi has really been like, shunned away from, especially like Lana, which has been really focused now on like NFTs and games and stuff, which is not bad. But I guess, if you want like a thriving, we want this to thrive, it's, I guess, helpful to have a thriving DeFi ecosystem around it. Of course, Ethereum, always will have a thriving DeFi ecosystem that will stand the test of time. But Arbitrum might be an interesting one for us. And we're actually, close with a lot of projects on Arbitrum like Dopex and others. And the idea is, yeah, something like this on Arbitrum could be really, really cool because, Arbitrum right now is doing their Odyssey. And then eventually when, if they do ever drop a token, it will just be so like perfect for us to be there because everybody will be like, okay, we need to do things on Arbitrum. What better way to do things than being rewarded for doing things on Arbitrum?
Sure.
So I think that that could be really good for us if we time it right. So the plan, like for us to deploy on Arbitrum shouldn't be like too long or hard. I guess for us it's like, okay, one chain at a time. Let's try it there, make sure everything works,
Sure.
and then just go from there. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, and look, I mean, I think the lower fee L2s and L1s are going to be really interesting for you to take a look at. I mean, I think, Polygon, Phantom, Avalanche are all potential for it. So, and look, at the end of the day, I assume you guys want to be as spread across as many chains as possible, but be able to manage it out of the gate in a controlled fashion. So I asked you earlier, we didn't get to it because we got off on a tangent, and I don't even know what the purpose would be, but is there going to be a core Fluidity token related to the project in some way?
Yeah, right. Because that governance, it all gets controlled through tokens, right?
Sure.
And token holders really get to decide some of those very valuable protocol parameters as well. And if we want Fluidity to stand the test of time, it has to be as decentralized as possible. So we've actually been like really thinking about how tokenomics work and how emissions should work. And like we've been taking inspiration from some other protocols. So for example, our emissions schedule, instead of it falling like, where, a lot of tokens get distributed early on, it actually follows now an inverse parabola. So it actually goes up over time, the token distribution. And then
Interesting.
as it hits a peak, it starts decaying. Because the idea is like at in the early days we'll have less users, right? And as more and more users come into the protocol, then those higher token emissions essentially help us grow. And having them would be useful because there's a larger community and hence a wider distribution of tokens if more are being distributed as more people join. That's, I guess, our thinking for now. And remembering as well, right? Like Fluidity is going to be distributing most of our token governance tokens through utility mining, right? So if you want Fluidity tokens, right, the only way really for most people is to use fluid assets in the protocols that they use, right? So,
Mm.
worst case scenario, if you just use fluid assets on like Uniswap or SushiSwap, the way that you've been trading already, you're getting fluidity tokens for using it. And
Oh,
yeah,
the rewards are paid in Fluidity?
so that'll be like extra, like obvious,
Oh, I
like in
got
our
you. I
governance
got you.
tokens, but you'll
Okay.
get the base yield obviously, but you'll also be getting those governance tokens. So it's very similar to
Nice.
liquidity mining. You get the base yield and then you get the
Nice.
liquidity mining tokens.
Less
You'll be
utility
getting
mining.
fluidity. Yeah, exactly, right? And then
Okay.
those lucky protocols that would be working with us early on, you'll also be getting their tokens, right? So I guess in
Very
a
nice.
sense on like Dodo, you'd be triple dipping for some people. You'll be
Yeah.
getting that base yield. You'll be getting a chance at winning a lot of fluidity token, and then you'll be getting a chance of winning a lot of Dodo tokens, right? So it's like every time you do a transaction, you get like 3 shots at winning like the
That's beautiful.
jackpot.
That's awesome.
Um, so yeah, I mean,
It's like the
and
ultimate scratch off.
well, and our goal, and I guess our thinking is right. If people are using fluid assets, then naturally liquidity problems that we might have early on will be remedified through this because the demand for fluid asset requires minting of fluid assets, and minting of fluid asset requires like people to actually deposit assets, and hence liquidity is naturally in the system. So liquidity basically becomes a second order effect of just the increase in demand for fluid assets, right? Because if
Right.
you think about it, if nobody's minting fluid assets and the demand's increasing, what's going to happen is that the price will start depegging. It'll go over $1 to $1.01 for one fluid USDC, 2 cents, so on, right? To the point where like it's arbitrary for someone like an arbitrager, right, to come in and say, hey, wait a second, I could sell fluid assets for like 3 cents extra on every dollar I mint. I'm going to do it, right? And so
Sure.
like very
Sure.
similar to how DAI benefits from arbitrage either direction, right? Same way fluid assets can benefit from that. But hopefully the idea is that as more and more people use fluid assets, right, and the TVL or the liquidity increases, it adds more demand, right? Because as soon as the liquidity increases, the prize money that could be won increases, right? And if there's more prizes that could be won, then more people start coming into the system, and it creates that pinwheel effect. Hoping that when people want out of the system, instead of like them unwrapping their tokens, they're just spending it, right? Okay,
Yeah.
well, if I instead of unwrapping, I'll just swap it for ETH, or I'll buy this NFT, or I'll pay this merchant instead, and liquidity keeps flowing into that system, and yeah, just perpetually it's on the move.
That's beautiful. In terms of the project itself, the protocol itself,
Mhm.
is how is it earning? Is it taking a percentage of the yield from the deposited assets, or how does the protocol earn money to continue on?
Yeah, so initially we were thinking of like taking a small cut out of the yield that's earned, but once you run the numbers, it's nothing significant. Like it will be so small that it won't be really enough for us to run the protocol. But utility mining is where it could be interesting, because utility mining is something that's, like our competitive advantage that only we could do. A lot of protocols, right, can use this as a way to distribute those massive token allocations that they have, like 20% for the community, 30% for the community. And they could use a system like this to actually distribute tokens to the community. So I guess that's another option that we have. Like, even if we take a very, very small cut of the utility mining tokens, right?
Sure.
Because of the value add of service and just the amount of tokens that protocols have to distribute, even if we get a small cut of that, that could be so much for us that we can run the
Oh,
treasury
yeah.
very profitably. Yeah. So that's how we're thinking about revenue, because yeah, we're gonna have a competitive advantage of with utility mining. For what it's worth, look, right now, like that algorithm, it is open source. Anybody can like look at it, but the implementation of it that we've made, it is proprietary to us, because it took a lot of like unique research that we had to come up with to build it
Sure.
out. Maybe the plan is eventually to open source it, but I guess for now, like the algorithm that prevents bots from attacking, that is to us. So you can copy everything from Fluidity, but that part you can't yet. So
I think that makes
if
total
someone
sense.
is able to figure out like another way of preventing bots, go for it. But I guess our way is, is something that we really thought it through. And interestingly
Yeah,
enough,
I think
right,
it's
part of
smart to
our
protect that.
research, we even had a chat with the super fluid team, and they were actually trying to solve a very similar problem to this, and they weren't able to figure out how to go about doing it. So it's actually been a problem that a lot of people have tried to solve, but never really come up with a solution.
That's That's awesome, and that Superfluid team is pretty damn smart. So that's impressive.
Yeah.
And I've interviewed the founder there. I love that project. I mean, I love that project across the board. And I think, look, I think it makes total sense for you guys to protect that. It's for the good of the protocol. It's for the good of the community. It's for the good of adoption. And I'm a big open source advocate, and maybe that's something you do down the line. But I think it makes sense. I think and this is one of those cases where, in order for you to thrive, in order for the protocol to catch on, that's a critical component of of making it a success. And I think that makes total sense to have that moat for what you're doing. So I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
In the beginning, are you going to be doing anything to, I don't know that you need to because of the potential for prizes, but is there a plan to potentially incentivize users for spreading the word, pushing adoption, et cetera, in the beginning stages at launch? Or is that something you don't really feel like you need to do because of the incentive of just using it?
I know it seems like this is the perfect thing ever and that everybody will use it and all that, but we definitely need help, with marketing, educating, and spreading the word, right? Because,
Right.
crypto has very short attention spans. And as part of being a founder, I realized that unfortunately narratives are so valuable and like what people keep hearing and seeing and they just kind of tend to conform. A lot of people in the space, I guess, they just want to like do things and like, like see what others are doing and just be part of it, and that's human nature, that's fine. So, I guess even if fluidity has very obvious benefits to everything else, if not everybody's talking about it, it doesn't make sense, right, to use it.
Sure.
So even if there's prize money, right? So it's like we really need a lot of help, when it comes to like having people talk about it, having people, like discuss it with each other and just see, explore and getting some like I guess brains on it, like there's so much we could do here and even use cases that we may not have thought about, right? Someone approached me like a long time ago and they said, what if you integrate this in gambling websites, right? When before you place the bet, you place the bet in fluid assets, right? So
Nice.
you kind of double dipped in your in your bet, not only do you like, you could win from like that bet, but you could also win from the fact that you transfer fluid assets, right? So, these
Yeah.
type of new weird implementations or utility of fluid assets, we can't even think about, but people could. We need as many people on us. And we've actually been researching, community adoption and tokenomics and stuff. So definitely the people that are involved early on, like, there is upside for them, whatever that means. So.
All right. Well, that's good to know. Everyone's always looking for an edge. So I'm sure that'll help people become a part of it. What's your current time frame for launch on mainnet?
So we've actually built one of the coolest new front ends. It's not like obviously live yet, but it's gonna be very, very cool. We've gotten custom animations for wrapping fluid assets. Like the
Nice.
swap is so like, it's customized to us, and we've actually had one of the best, in our opinion, design agencies in Australia work with us on it. So it's gonna be quite the experience, the entire wrapping. So we've also actually built something like you might be familiar with fees.wtf, right? You connect your TF
Sure.
wallet, and it tells you how much you've burnt in gas fees. Or we built something very similar, like for Fluidity. So you connect your wallet, and we actually scan all your transactions, right, through Uniswap, etc., using stables, and we'll actually like compute, right, how much you could have earned using fluid assets instead, right? So kind of like very similar
Nice.
to fees.wtf, but like had you used fluid assets instead for your transactions, you could have won, $10,000, whatever that number may be, right?
Right.
So, things
Right.
like that where that will be ready on day one. So hopefully that helps with like the viral marketing part of it. That people be like, crap, I could have won like all this money had I just used fluid assets instead, right? But yeah, I think the whole like wrapping experience is gonna be quite the experience for a lot of people. We've actually really thought
Nice.
it through and it looks really nice. So preliminary plan is sometime next month, hope towards the end after the merge. and just because we're ready before the merge, but we don't want like the merge to potentially break things, right? We don't know what might happen, what may not happen.
Right.
Fingers crossed, everything will work out. But and I guess it's a narrative thing, right? If you launch at before the merge or after or right after, during or after the merge, nobody's gonna be talking about you
Yeah,
because
you're
the
buried.
merge.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully, like a week or two after the merge gives us some like breathing room. Like, okay, what's the next big thing? All right, that people are now like, okay, what does the merge enable? Maybe a new token
Yeah.
distribution model, a new primitive could be one of those things that just is tied right with the merge. That okay, merge happened, new primitive create came out. Who knows?
Yeah.
Is this the consequence of the merge? Let's see.
Yeah, definitely. I think that timing post merge could be really cool because it'll be something fresh and new on the new version, and I think that'll get people excited about it. So I've got 100 ideas popping into my head now, so I'll probably be bugging you guys later. But is there anything else in this concept that we haven't touched on or covered that you think people should really know about?
I think like one thing that just pops up to the top of my head is the type of protocols that could benefit from this, right? We discussed dApps, right? Like AMMs, NFT marketplaces that could compete for user order flow. But even one layer below that, right? Even stable coins themselves, right, could benefit from this. Because what we were initially thinking was, wait a second, stable coins are, a dime a dozen, right? Like every person and their uncle is launching a stable coin now. And
Yes.
is the differentiating factor between stable coins, right? Like, why would you use, X stable coin or Y stable coin, right? Especially stable coins being a market or, where like when it's a winner take all type of thing, right? Like where Circle's just been dominating everybody. And I think this is where it's fascinating because right now, like using any coin other than USDC has an implied risk. Obviously, USDC itself has an implied risk, right? But if I use, let's say, DAI or Frax or USDT, I'm taking an extra risk, right? And in most cases, that risk is I guess balanced out with higher yield, right? Because if I, let's say, farm USDT or lend it out or farm Frax, I get a higher APY because there's a higher implied risk and higher APYs. But there's no similar concept for using it, right? So it makes it like very, very hard to argue using a higher risk stablecoin when you get nothing out of it compared to using USDC, right? And
Right.
so what I guess I've been observing or what thoughts I have is like, why would people use other stablecoins when there's high risk and no extra rewards for doing so, right? And so this could potentially unlock that ability to, incentivize people to pick between stablecoins, right? Because if, like, let's say we're farming Fraxed, stablecoins, and we essentially pass those rewards on to the users, if Frax, like lending Frax out is higher APY, then essentially that higher yield is, passed on to users and higher rewards, right? Because trading $1,000 worth of Frax and $1,000 of USDC, the Frax has a higher payout probability and higher rewards attached to it. And even protocols like Frax could subsidy it, right? They could provide more liquidity. They could,
Yep.
give us more stables and hence higher APYs because they're not going to be spending theirs, but that extra yield is going to the people that will be. Or they could even like subsidize it by rewarding governance tokens, right? So right
Yep.
now, a lot of stable coins do that. They say, "Oh, farm our stable coin on X, money market, and we'll give you a higher APY because we're giving our governance token as additional yield, right?"
Right.
Now, that's fun and all, but you're basically promoting the speculation of that asset class because people are speculating that their APY is going to be high and they can sell those governance tokens, right? So it kind
Right.
of does not build the utility for those stable coins, right? It's a one-off thing that you farm it and sure they get liquidity, but it's not like I can now use it for more things because people are not using it. People aren't using it. So the idea is that if we actually now apply that to the utility side of it, like where people are getting those same rewards, but they actually have to use it. Now they're thinking, okay, where do I use it? Right? I'm going to be using it for payments, because that's where I use money. I might be using it for swaps or purchasing NFTs and stuff. And some of those things require like integrations for like, let's say an NFT marketplace and stuff. So now you actually have a community that wants to spend their their Frax tokens or their Fluid Frax tokens, and they have an incentive to push for the adoption of it on the counterparty level, right? So you basically kind of like an army that wants to spend it, and they can, and they're incentivized in spending it. So hopefully that creates more utility and use cases for it, because the more use cases you have of spending it, the more reduction in friction that users have when they actually want to spend that fluid wrapped asset to claim those rewards, right? And I guess
Yeah.
one could argue that it also aligns interests, that the actual users of that stablecoin are getting the tokens rather than the people that are speculating using it. I mean, stablecoins are a bit of like, who's your actual user base? Are it the people that are holding it or the people that are using it? But I argue that this is a great way for them to target both of those markets, right? Not only do you reward the people that are staking it or farming it, but also the people that are using it with ownership of the protocol. So that could be an interesting way for new protocols, and new stable coins to like differentiate themselves, right? And actually become
Absolutely.
more competitive in acquiring users, right? And potentially, break that circle monopoly in the stable coin space. And not saying anything bad about Circle. There are one of our seed investors, but
Oh, they are.
but
Interesting.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah, they actually really saw the retail side of this playing out, like
Sure.
merchant adopting this like Walmart and style. They
Yeah, that
thought that
world.
that could potentially like really be a catalyst for retail adoption and merchant adoption. So that's their point of view on this. So yeah.
That's amazing. Well, it's funny that you went into this example because I've been sitting here making a list of projects that I'm connected to, and one of them is the first one on my list is a stable coin that I think this would be an amazing boost to the project, and that I also like the project a lot. So we'll talk about that offline, but I definitely can see that absolutely being a boost to actual use of these things. These projects in the stablecoin front, they spend all their time trying to get deals and integrations with other projects so that their tokens are being used in other protocols. But the idea of actually having their stablecoin being used and spent and shared with others and having an incentive around that, I think that's incredibly powerful. That's fantastic. Great example.
Exactly, because all the benefits that we or the principles of fluid assets, they apply, transitively. So, if they participate in these programs, the counterparties are incentive because of that 20%, like user order flow is now going from USDC or USDT to these stable coins. So all these properties are just cascading on top of each other. And yeah, so like, if this does start taking off, we think that just all the stuff that is in play could really exponentially grow it. In crypto, we do see this. It's like slowly, then suddenly. And this is one of those 0 to 1 things that, should it take off, could really, see that pinwheel or flywheel effect in action.
That's yeah, absolutely. I see so much potential. I'm really excited about your project, man. This is fantastic.
Appreciate it. Yeah, yeah. It's quite interesting once you really start thinking about it.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
we've been thinking about it for the past year and a half, and like, yeah, every day it's something new with this, yeah, for us.
Yeah, I don't know that I get any work done. All right. So people can go to fluidity.money to reach you. I'll put all of your other social contacts in the show notes. Is there anything else in particular that you guys are looking for? Talent, people, community, people to get involved and get engaged? Do you need more testers on testnet? Anything else that the community can do?
Yeah, I mean, anybody that wants to get involved, if you have like, a community that would be interested, I'm willing to like, go on and explain it to anybody there. And anybody that wants to engage with us, please do. A lot of our incentive models are, like I've been quite the preacher of like community incentives. So, we will be sticking true to that. So get
Cool.
involved in our community, and yeah, like, anybody that has any questions or ideas, just let us know because we're active. We actually were using Slack for the very long time, but now we've switched it all to Discord. So the entire team is on Discord. So come say hi and we'll be there.
Awesome. Well, I think it's a great opportunity for people to get involved in this project early. It sounds like there's going to be a lot of incentives to help spread the word and to get you guys engaged with people. So really, really, I'm blown away by what you guys are doing. I think there's amazing potential here, and I think the built-in incentives for the other protocols to utilize it are really powerful. So I'm looking forward to seeing how you guys do, and I'd love to follow up with you around lunchtime and get you back on and see how things are going.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Yeah. I think by then when we have the new web app, like I'd love to just like take you through it because there's so much
Yeah.
stuff in there that you're just gonna find so fascinating. Yeah.
That's awesome. Shahmeer, thanks so much for coming on and telling us all about it. I'll get this out in the next couple of days and really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, likewise. Thanks for, bearing with me for the past 2 hours. I really appreciate it.
No, it's totally worth it, man. This was awesome.